Tom, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Sure, great, excellent. And we're going to have a great evening with
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. There's such a beautiful crowd already, and
yes,
beautiful saris. It's a wonderful
absolutely.
night.
You see one of the best dresses today. Best
Fabulous.
dressed men and women today.
Yes, fabulous.
Yes,
fabulous.
So Tom, before we get into what is going to happen tonight and what you are going to talk about, I want to go back to India.
Yes.
And you spent some time in India. When was that? What took you there to India?
I was in India first as a very young man. I spent a year of my university at, I was at Yale. I was somehow got caught up in the beauty of the Vedas, and I decided, I want to know more about this country and this culture. I spent a year, this was 1975, 1976.
Emergency time.
Yes, emergency time, Indira Gandhi's emergency time. I was at Andhra University in Visakhapatnam, Baltere, studied Telugu before going out.
Oh, so do you speak Telugu?
Oh, now I've forgotten so much, but at that time I could get along pretty well. Enjoyed it enormously. Studied, I was a history major, and I studied Gandhi's, I talked with the surviving men, by and large, who had been the leaders of Gandhi's independence movement in Vizag. It was fascinating. They were elderly men, most of them at that time, and they were dissidents during the time of Indira Gandhi's emergency. Several of them were in jail. So it was a very interesting year. It was the first of 10 years that I spent in Asia. It was a formative year for me. I was only 19 when I arrived in India.
So basically till 29, 30 you spent in Asia, or?
10 out of the next 12 or 13 years in India. First there, then Hong Kong, Japan, and back in India several times doing news reporting in later years.
So which news organization did you work for?
My first newspaper job was with the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong. I went from there to the Boston Globe. This was at the time when newspapers were doing very well. The Globe had bureaus all over the world. I opened the Asia Bureau, which they based in Tokyo at that time, but traveled very widely around that enormous region. Was in India many times. I was in India when Indira Gandhi was assassinated, and was there for all of the terrible aftermath of that.
At that time you were covering as a reporter? Or?
As a reporter.
As a reporter.
Yes,
For
yes.
Boston Globe? Or?
For the Boston Globe.
Boston Globe, excellent. So when you went to India for the first time in 1975, what was your first impression when you reached there?
Well, you think back, 1975 is a long time ago, and, and a lot of evolution has taken place since then. Of course, there are no doubt still a few things about India that you might call timeless, that old word, but the top of the Indian economy has exploded since that time. 1975, the top of the economy was nothing like it is now. And it was a major, major cultural difference for a young American coming from a farm in Illinois to Visakhapatnam. The people were incredibly warm and incredibly welcoming. The food was incredibly hot. I had to get used to all that chili, but came to love it. I was immediately smitten by the culture. I loved the music. I loved the dance. I loved the sacred literature of India. I was enchanted by the religious life of India, which is so overwhelming for most Westerners when they first arrive, and was for me, but in quite a welcome way. And just the fabulous intellectual discourse that went on among all my neighbors, their professors and students there at the university in Andhra. It was a fabulous time. We traveled all over India. We loved it.
Tom, earlier you mentioned that what really attracted to you was Vedas. So how did you get connected with Vedas? How the Vedas came into your life?
Oh, that's an interesting story. I grew up in a farming community in the Midwest. I had a very religious childhood, not in a confining way. It was very open-hearted and warm. But I had my first culture shock when I came to the East Coast of the United States. I went to Yale. It was so metropolitan. It was rather secular compared to my upbringing. My upbringing was almost Amish. And here was this very secular, urban East Coast world. I was a bit disenchanted with that. So I ended up taking a course at the Divinity School at Yale in the Rig Veda. And I was thinking actually of leaving university entirely, but I thought, wait a minute, why leave? This fascinates me. In a way, the spirituality of India was more in tune with the spirituality of my rural childhood in the Midwest than than the East Coast was.
Sure.
And maybe that's what took me in the first place.
Did this also lead you to Upanishads?
Yes, of course. Over time, I read Upanishads. I read very widely. But remember, I studied Telugu, not Sanskrit.
Sure.
So ultimately, I didn't go on to become a scholar of these things, a serious scholar. But I paid a good deal of attention to them.
So when was the last time you went to India?
The last time is now, it's a long time ago now. I have not been in India since the late 1980s.
Yep.
So I'm afraid it's been a long time, and I'm sorry for that.
Sure.
I've sent my children. My eldest son has gone to India, and I look forward to returning myself.
Do you still eat Indian food?
Yes, absolutely. Indian food, as my children will tell you, is a staple in our home.
Oh, excellent, excellent. And do you any favorite Indian restaurants in Boston?
You know, yes. Over time, I have been a patron of many. Let's say.
Now let's talk a little bit about tonight, Akshay Patra. And this is a great concept in feeding children. Since we're talking about food here, what message you want to give somebody who has lived in India and very much influenced by the culture, and somebody so much immersed into the news and everybody, the Western world as well. So what couple of messages you will give out to people as far as it relates to the Akshay Patra?
The first is this. The news is full of distressing, disturbing, challenging developments around the world. When you see something as positive and effective as Akshay Patra, you have to pay attention to it. When people step up and do things that fight against all the difficulties and challenges and hard news with something that's so fruitful and positive and hopeful, I think we really need to focus on these things. That's the first thing. Then you look more closely at the work that Desh Deshpande and the whole crew all around the world has done on this. It's cutting edge philanthropy, it's cutting edge work in fulfilling needs that aren't fulfilled otherwise. The efficiency of it, the scope and scale of it, the targeted quality of it. This is not some kind of sloppy do-gooderism. This is very carefully focused work. It strikes me as a kind of template or model that could be replicated more widely in India and around the world.
This is going to be my next question, that somebody who really follows the world in news, and this concept can be replicated in Africa and Latin America and even developed countries too.
Sure, there's plenty of need right here in the United States. If you can get the model down in India, and I think they're doing a very good job on this, I could see this rolling around the world. Now, let's be fair. It makes sense that it begins in India. India has an enormous proportion of the world's underfed children.
Sure.
It's a very large country, and it has a large population that still wrestles with poverty. But that makes this success all the more impressive. If India can do it with a vehicle like this, maybe this can be replicated elsewhere. And there's another thing, another message here. Indians have emigrated to the United States famously and very successfully. I think it's a hopeful sign for the world when Indians don't just abandon the country from which they've come, but rather think back with open hearts in a magnanimous way and say, we can not only put our kind of entrepreneurial genius to work here in the first world in the United States, we can look home as well and help India build a broader, deeper economic development than it's had so far, with all of its successes, which are very admirable.
Sure. Now, of course, you were in India many, many years ago, but I'm sure that you must follow what is happening in India today.
Yes,
and
Prime Minister Modi has brought all kinds of new energy there.
So what is your new impression of India?
I cannot speak with expertise at this point. I'm eager to get back, but watching from afar, India is such a large country. What is it, 1.3 billion? Something to that effect now.
Yes.
The portion of India's economy which has become hyper successful is a dazzling, dazzling thing. It's a tribute to India's deep cultural value on education, to the drive of Indian people to succeed, to innovate, to do new things. These are very admirable. The old challenge in India is, how do you push this out to more of the society, more of the population? And it's not just a numbers game. My impression is it's a cultural issue as well, to build that truly inclusive economy that brings everyone in. It's a large challenge. We have plenty of challenges in this country. Some we handle better than others, and same with India. I don't mean to be judging. It's more, I see tremendous success and the possibility of that moving more and more deeply into India's very large population. If that can be done, this is an incredibly promising development for the world.
I have two more questions for you. So one is that you spent some time in India as a reporter in Asia.
Yes.
Who are the three people you interviewed who really, you said, oh my God, who would be those three people you interviewed?
Well, the first ones, let me, as a group, the men, and they were old men at the time, that I interviewed in 1975, who had been the leaders of Gandhi's independence movement in Visakhapatnam. They were an impressive group of men. They had been close to that, they'd been in the heart of that movement there. All those years later, they were still on fire with the idealism of India's original independence. And they really inspired me. You could feel all of the energy and aspiration that was there at the birth of modern independent India. So let me cite them as one group. All of Asia we're talking about here, that's a very large arena. That's a very large arena. Later I would say I was inspired by people in Asia fighting for democratic change. It was not always easy. I remember when Kim Dae-jung, he had been in exile from South Korea during a time of a really military government there. When he returned to South Korea, I returned with him. He was very vulnerable at that time. Security forces all around him. South Korea was very tough politically, and I mean physically tough. To see how one man can stand up and continue to raise a torch for democratic values in a setting like that. And ultimately, South Korea came in this direction, but it took the courage of individuals. He was another, and another, maybe a third, right along those lines. I was in Asia and in the Philippines when Ferdinand Marcos was ousted finally there, and Cory Aquino, you remember?
Yes, I do remember.
The widow of the slain Benigno Aquino became president. Also traveling with her at night, way out in the boondocks in the Philippines, in the jungle, on little stages where she could easily have been harmed. The courage that she showed in campaigning for office and participating in democracy and leading in that direction, that inspired me as well.
Now, you interview almost every day somebody.
Yes.
So in the global scale, who are the three people you have interviewed and you have found them totally fascinating? It's a tough question.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Let's see. I don't know. Just offhand, one, the famous management guru Peter Drucker. He's no longer alive. The last interview of his life he did with me. He was 95 or 6.
And when was that?
Maybe 5 or 6 years ago now. Some minds are so alive. Here was a man, stone deaf at this point. He had to have the questions written down, then he would respond. A mind so brilliant, even at that age. I can never forget this. Another, the famous photographer Annie Leibovitz. Annie Leibovitz. She's a photographer to the stars, but also beautiful artistic photography. Her sense of the visual world and how she could articulate it, in language, not just in photography, was fabulous. And one other that surprised me in a way, but I totally enjoyed, was Yoko Ono. We think of her as screeching and screaming. In fact, it was the most brilliant, humane, full of heart interview, one of the most I've ever done.
And the third one?
Well, that's three right there. Peter and Annie and Yoko, those were all...
Any politician?
I have to say they're not usually as inspiring because they're so guarded. They tend to be so guarded in their comments.
Sure.
And the most exciting interviews are the ones where the walls are down and the candor is perfect. Then it's exciting.
Thank you very much.
Oh, it's such a pleasure.